Feeling lost. Psalm 143. Divine prayer for guidance and protection. Find true peace now. Have you ever found yourself in a moment where the noise of life drowns out your inner peace? When every path seems unclear, and no amount of effort seems to bring clarity or comfort? It's in these moments of desperation, when nothing feels certain, that our hearts cry out for guidance, for protection, and for peace. Imagine standing in the middle of a vast, unending desert. The wind swirls the sand around you, obscuring the horizon. You're unsure of the direction to take, and every step feels like it could lead further into the unknown. For many of us, this is what life often feels like, a wilderness of uncertainty where answers appear out of reach. But there is a way out of this emotional and spiritual wilderness, roadmap to peace, clarity, and divine protection. Psalm 143 offers precisely this. It's not just a prayer, it's a lifeline. Penned by David at a time of deep despair, this psalm is a raw and vulnerable plea, a moment of surrender to God when all other options seem lost. And yet, it's more than a cry for help. It's a profound and transformative guide for anyone yearning for meaning and direction. In this video, we'll explore Psalm 143 with a depth you've never experienced before, unpacking its timeless wisdom verse by verse. It's a path that leads from despair to hope, from confusion to clarity, and from fear to peace. Stay with me, and together we'll uncover how this psalm not only speaks to the soul's darkest hours, but also provides a spiritual framework for navigating the chaos of modern life. And here's the promise for those who stay until the end. I'll share a practical, yet deeply spiritual practice inspired by this psalm. It's a practice that will not only strengthen your connection with God, but also provide clarity and direction in your daily life. Now, ask yourself this: if there were a way to break free from the feeling of being lost to step into light, clarity, and protection, would you take it? If the answer is yes, join me as we unpack the powerful message of Psalm 143. Let's discover together how this divine prayer can transform your struggles into strength and lead you to the peace your heart is longing for. The unique emotional depth of Psalm 143. Psalm 143 stands out as one of the most emotionally profound prayers in the Bible. Its words echo with the rawness of human vulnerability, the kind that emerges only in life's darkest valleys. Written during a time of great turmoil, the psalm portrays David not as a king, but as a man stripped to his core, crying out to God with an honesty that many of us are scared to voice. He isn't asking for superficial blessings or quick fixes, he's pleading for survival, clarity, and connection. That's why it resonates so deeply with anyone who has ever felt lost in the chaos of life. David begins with a desperate plea: Lord, hear my prayer. Listen to my cry for mercy. There's no pretense here. He doesn't approach God with formalities or polished words. Instead, he lays bare his pain and asks only that God listens. This is a profound reminder that we, too, are allowed to come to God just as we are, broken and bruised, without fear of judgment. For many, this first step of openly speaking their pain feels impossible. Society often teaches us to bottle up emotions, to present a facade of strength. But Psalm 143 shatters that illusion, encouraging us to approach God with courage, honesty, and humility. What makes this psalm so unique is how David describes his inner turmoil. He says, "The enemy pursues me. He crushes me to the ground. He makes me dwell in the darkness like those long dead." While David's enemies were literal, facing persecution and physical danger, his words have a timeless quality that mirrors the emotional battles we face today. loneliness, anxiety, depression. These are the modern-day enemies that crush many of us under their weight, leaving us feeling lifeless and trapped in darkness. What David does here is extraordinary. He acknowledges his brokenness, but doesn't allow it to define him. He brings it to God, trusting that divine mercy can lift him from that pit. Yet the psalm isn't merely a cry of despair. It's also a call to reflection. I remember the days of long ago. I meditate on all your works and consider what your hands have done. In this moment, David teaches us a crucial practice. When present struggles seem overwhelming, anchor yourself in the firm foundation of God's faithfulness. By recalling past victories and moments of divine intervention, David finds hope amidst his hopelessness. This isn't blind optimism, it's active trust rooted in evidence. When life feels unbearable, how often do we pause to reflect on the ways God has carried us through in the past? This is what makes Psalm 143 not just a prayer of desperation, but also one of resilience. David's plea reaches its crescendo in what is arguably the most powerful verse. Show me the way I should go, for to you I entrust my life. Here, he shifts from lament to surrender. He doesn't demand answers on his own terms or cling to his own understanding. Instead, he places his entire life in God's hands, acknowledging the divine wisdom that far surpasses human comprehension. This is where the psalm offers its deepest wisdom. Trusting God doesn't always mean receiving immediate solutions or being led down paths of comfort. Often, it means stepping into the unknown with the faith that God is guiding you, even if you can't yet see the destination. The transformative nature of Psalm 143 lies in its ability to take the human experience of despair and frame it as part of a larger, divine journey. David's words remind us that feeling crushed, lost, or uncertain is not a failure of faith, but an opportunity to draw closer to God. The psalm strips away the illusion of self-sufficiency, urging us to release the burdens we were never meant to carry alone. As the psalm continues, David demonstrates complete dependence on God, saying, "Rescue me from my enemies, Lord, for I hide myself in you." Here, enemies take on a universal meaning. They might be external challenges, internal fears, or spiritual struggles. The act of hiding in God is more than a metaphor. It's a spiritual posture, a way of finding safety and renewal in divine presence. When life becomes overwhelming and the noise of the world drowns out peace, this verse offers an alternative: retreat into God, where there is protection, guidance, and presence that never fails. Psalm 143 teaches that surrender is not weakness, but strength. In surrender, we align ourselves with God's will and trust Him to do what we cannot. Instead of being consumed by the darkness, David uses it as a backdrop against which God's light can shine even brighter. For anyone feeling lost, this psalm is a reminder that no matter how crushing the weight of life feels, there is always a path forward. That path begins with surrender and trust, and it leads directly to God's unfailing protection and guidance. This is why Psalm 143 remains timeless and vital. It speaks directly to the greatest struggles of the human spirit, while pointing us toward the divine refuge that offers not just survival, but peace. David's words aren't just a cry for help, they're a roadmap for anyone who longs to transform their trials into spiritual strength and find clarity amidst the world's chaos. How Psalm 143 guides us. Psalm 143 is masterfully structured to lead us from despair to hope, from confusion to clarity, and from fear to trust. Each verse is intentional, weaving a narrative that captures the journey of the human heart when it is fully laid bare before God. This psalm isn't just a collection of emotional pleas. It's a step-by-step guide for navigating some of life's darkest moments. When we look closely, we see how Psalm 143 unfolds like a divine map, showing us the way to peace and protection. David begins with a request for connection, opening with the lines, "Lord, hear my prayer. Listen to my cry for mercy." This is the first crucial step in the path. Psalm 143 lays out, seeking an audience with God. David doesn't bury his pain, nor does he allow pride or self-sufficiency to keep him from approaching the Lord. Instead, he humbles himself completely, laying everything at God's feet and pleading for God's attention. In this simplicity is profound wisdom. How often, when lost in our own struggles, do we fail to reach out to God with directness and humility? David shows us that the first step is not solving the problem ourselves, but aligning our hearts with the one who holds the ultimate solutions. The structure of the psalm then shifts to an honest confession of David's inner turmoil. He acknowledges his enemies, saying, "The enemy pursues me, he crushes me to the ground." These words are heavy, describing not just external opposition, but the crushing weight of fear, panic, and spiritual exhaustion. David is unflinching in his honesty, painting a picture of his anguish, but in doing so, he shows us the next critical step, acknowledging our pain. Too often, we put on a strong front, ignoring the emotional wounds tearing at us from within. However, healing begins when we bring those struggles before God without hesitation. David models the essence of true vulnerability, teaching us to bring the entirety of our burdens to the Lord. Psalm 143 then shifts into reflection, which is an essential turning point. David says, "I meditate on all your works and consider what your hands have done." Here, David pulls himself out of the hopelessness of the present by focusing on God's faithfulness throughout history. He doesn't allow his struggles to consume him entirely. Instead, he intentionally remembers God's mighty acts, his unfailing promises, and the evidence of his provision in the past. It's as if David is saying, "Even in this darkness, I know the light exists, because I've seen it before." This verse is a call to all of us to cultivate a habit of remembrance, of looking back to see how God's faithfulness has shaped our lives in ways we couldn't always see in the moment. The psalm builds momentum as David begins to cry out for God's guidance. He pleads, "Teach me the way I should go, for to you I entrust my life." This step represents a critical spiritual shift from asking for relief to asking for direction. David doesn't simply seek escape from his circumstances. He doesn't say, "Remove this pain now." Instead, he seeks God's wisdom and acknowledges the need for divine leadership. This kind of surrender takes incredible courage because it requires us to acknowledge that our own understanding is limited, that we can't always trust our internal compass. David trusts that God's plan is better than his own. In today's world, where independence and self-reliance are valued above all, this verse is a challenge to let go and let God guide. At the heart of Psalm 143 is David's deeply personal plea, "Rescue me from my enemies, Lord, for I hide myself in you." Here, David portrays the act of hiding in God as an act of strength. Hiding implies vulnerability, a need for safety and shelter, but in the spiritual sense, it is an act of faith. David understands that throwing himself into God's presence is the only way to find true protection. It's a reminder that trusting God goes beyond hoping for external deliverance. Sometimes, the enemies we need protection from aren't just physical circumstances, but internal struggles, our doubts, fears, and insecurities. David shows us that, in God, we find the refuge we seek, both physically and spiritually. What makes this psalm even more remarkable is how it concludes with an implicit shift in tone from despair to hope. David doesn't focus on the resolution of his immediate problems. Instead, he focuses on God's ability to lead him forward. "Let your good spirit lead me on level ground," he prays. This isn't just a request for guidance. It's an acknowledgement of God's sustaining presence. It's a promise to God and to himself that he will continue to walk the path God has set before him, no matter how uncertain the way ahead may seem. Psalm 143 offers us a blueprint for navigating life's storms. It starts with crying out to God with humility and honesty, acknowledging our pain and vulnerability. From there, it leads us to reflect on God's past faithfulness, to renew our trust in his guidance, and to deepen our connection to him as our ultimate refuge. This psalm is dynamic, offering more than a temporary comfort. It transforms despair into active faith, empowering us to face our struggles with confidence in God's provision. When we break down Psalm 143 in this way, we see how deliberately David invites us into his journey of submission and trust. Each verse guides us closer to a deeper understanding of how to find peace through connection with God. This is not just an emotional plea. It's a practical framework for bridging the gap between human fragility and divine strength. Each word is an invitation for all of us to take the first step, to surrender our struggles to God, and to trust that even in the wilderness, there is a path forward. Why we all seek guidance and protection. There is a universal truth about the human experience. We all, at some point, wrestle with uncertainty. When life becomes overwhelming, when decisions loom over us, or when challenges seem insurmountable, a deep craving for clarity and protection arises within us. Psalm 143, though written thousands of years ago, speaks directly to this timeless need. It taps into a truth that transcends culture, age, and background. Being lost is part of being human, and so is the longing to be found. David's cry for rescue in this psalm addresses a fundamental reality of life. No one is entirely self-sufficient. Deep down, we all realize this, even if pride or circumstance keeps us from admitting it. Life is unpredictable. One day, the path feels clear and manageable. The next, a crisis hits, and suddenly, everything we thought we knew is thrown into question. It might be a personal loss, the sudden burden of financial strain, a health scare, or even the quiet and creeping weight of loneliness. These moments strip away the illusion of control, revealing how much we long for guidance, a steady hand to lead us when we can no longer navigate the storm on our own. What makes this need so profound is how universal it is. It doesn't matter if you're someone seen as strong, confident, or successful. Underneath, every one of us has faced moments where we've looked around for answers and felt the crushing reality that none were immediately visible. It's in these moments, when we admit feeling lost, that Psalm 143 reaches into the heart of our struggles. David's words show that seeking guidance and protection is not a sign of weakness. It's an essential part of living a life rooted in trust. The reason we seek guidance is simple. Our perspective is limited. When we're caught in the middle of a problem, clarity often feels unattainable. Fear clouds our thoughts, distractions pull our attention, and doubt whispers that things might never resolve. David's plea in Psalm 143, "Show me the way I should go," reminds us why seeking God's guidance is crucial. God sees what we can't. He knows the path forward, even when it feels like there's no way through. The act of surrendering our direction to Him opens up the possibility of clarity when we are no longer consumed by trying to control every outcome ourselves. But why do we also crave protection alongside guidance? It's because life doesn't just leave us directionless. It often feels dangerous. For David, the dangers were literal enemies, who pursued him with the intent to destroy him. For us, the dangers are often more subtle, yet just as threatening. Anxiety, for example, has a way of pursuing us tirelessly, crushing us under its weight. Feelings of inadequacy can attack us like unseen enemies, whispering lies about failure and defeat. David's words, "Rescue me from my enemies, Lord. I hide myself in you," echo the human desire not only for safety but also for a shield of Pisa, constant refuge in the battles of the mind and soul. Modern life amplifies this need. With constant distractions, pressures to perform, and an endless stream of comparisons, it's easy to feel like you're drowning under the weight of it all. Science even confirms this stress floods our bodies with cortisol, driving us into survival mode. But here's the profound insight. Psalm 143 offers a spiritual antidote to this cycle. By turning to God for protection and guidance, we take the first step toward breaking free from the chains of fear and uncertainty. Science itself aligns with this, showing how practices like prayer and meditation lower stress, calm the nervous system, and release serotonin and dopamine, naturally shifting us toward peace and stability. Psalm 143 also invites us to consider the unique dynamic between vulnerability and trust. When David asks God to lead him, teach him, and protect him, he acknowledges something crucial. Admitting you need help is not a weakness, it's a strength. The world often tells us to figure things out on our own, to approach life with unrelenting self-reliance. But this psalm tears down that myth. David acknowledges his limitations and turns his focus to someone greater. In doing so, he invites us to embrace the beauty of surrender, to trust that the Creator of the universe cares enough to guide and protect us personally. The desire for guidance is intimately connected to our longing for purpose. When David cries out for the way he should go, he does not just want relief. He isn't asking for the easiest route through his struggles. Instead, he seeks alignment with God's will. In surrendering his path, David taps into a deeper truth. True clarity doesn't come from being handed all the answers. It comes from knowing you're walking in step with God's plan. This is the form of guidance that Psalm 143 offers, a reminder that God's ways are always good, even when the way forward feels unclear. Protection, too, takes on a richer meaning in this psalm. David doesn't just want safety from physical harm. He wants spiritual sanctuary. His enemies may have been external, but many of ours are internal. Fear, doubt, anger, despair. These forces wage war against the soul, pulling us deeper into darkness if left unchecked. David's plea for God's rescue reminds us that hiding in the Lord isn't an escape. It's courage in its purest form. To seek shelter in Him is to recognize that His strength is greater than our circumstances, and His love is stronger than our fears. When we reflect on Psalm 143, we see how its timeless truths intersect with our daily struggles. Our search for guidance and protection isn't a flaw. It's part of what makes us human. But what sets this psalm apart is how it reframes that search. It shows us that the very act of seeking, of crying out to God in vulnerability, is the beginning of finding peace. In a world obsessed with self-sufficiency, Psalm 143 dares to present a radical alternative. A life rooted not in our own control, but in the assurance of divine leadership and protection. This longing is universal because it reflects the deepest cry of the human heart, the desire to find our way and to know that, no matter the storms around us, God is there to walk with us, shielding us as we go. This psalm isn't just about surviving the trials of life. It's about thriving in the assurance that God's guidance and protection are always within reach. The power of surrender in finding direction, Surrender is a concept that many people see as a form of weakness, as if giving up control means losing all sense of purpose or identity. But in the context of faith, surrender is not about defeats, about trust. Psalm 143 demonstrates that surrendering to God's will is one of the most powerful things a person can do when faced with uncertainty and despair. It is within the act of surrender that clarity and direction emerge. Instead of trying to navigate a storm with our limited understanding, surrender means leaning into a divine plan that is greater than anything we could ever imagine. David's words in Psalm 143 express this surrender in its purest form. Teach me to do your will, for you are my God. May your good spirit lead me on level ground. In these lines, we find the heart of surrenderer, willingness to be taught, guided, and aligned with God's purposes. David is not asking for shortcuts or instant solutions. He is submitting himself to the process of being led by a higher authority. This is where the beauty of surrender lies. It is not about passivity. It is about actively choosing to place your trust in God and relinquishing the illusion that you have to figure everything out on your own. True surrender begins with acknowledging our limitations. When life feels chaotic and overwhelming, our natural tendency is often to take control, to find solutions on our terms. We strategize, overthink, and exhaust ourselves trying to fix problems with limited perspective. In human terms, this seems logically if we work harder or think smarter, we'll find the answers we need. But Psalm 143 reminds us of a deeper truth. Our limited vision cannot see the full picture of what God has planned. Surrender is the humble recognition that God's understanding far exceeds what we can perceive in the moment. It shifts us from fighting a battle we cannot win on our own to placing ourselves under God's protection and direction. David's act of surrender is not passive. It's active and intentional. By praying, "Teach me the way I should go," he demonstrates his desire not just to survive his circumstances, but to grow through them. This line also illustrates that surrender is not about giving up, it's about giving over. It's an exchange of our limited control for God's perfect guidance. In practical terms, when we surrender to God, we silence the noise of our anxious striving and tune into the clarity of His voice. It's like adjusting the frequency of a radio until the static clears, and suddenly the signal becomes crisp and unmistakable. Surrendering also requires trust, which is one of the most challenging leaps of faith we can take. To say, "I trust you, Lord," even when I don't understand the way forward, demands a level of vulnerability that many of us find uncomfortable. Yet this vulnerability is where transformation begins. David's trust in God's leadership runs so deep that even in the middle of turmoil, he can call out with confidence, knowing his steps will be guided. His surrender is not an act of resignation, but of assurance, an unshakable trust that God's direction is better than anything he could choose on his own. The metaphor of a GPS recalibrating is a perfect example of how surrender works in finding direction. Imagine driving along an unfamiliar road only to realize you've missed a turn. At that moment, your GPS doesn't shout in frustration or give up. It simply recalibrates, finding the next best path to your destination. God's guidance works in much the same way. Even when we veer off course, surrendering to Him allows us to be realigned with His plans. David acknowledges this truth when he prays, "Let your good spirit lead me on level ground." He trusts that no matter how lost he feels, God is recalibrating his journey, guiding him towards solid ground where his steps are secure. Surrender also has the unique power to bring peace in the midst of chaos. When we attempt to control every detail of our lives, the weight of that effort can crush us. The pressure to perform, achieve, and solve every problem leads to exhaustion, anxiety, and frustration. But when we surrender that burden to God, a shift occurs. Suddenly, we are no longer trying to carry the weight of the world on our own shoulders. Instead, we become partners with God in the journey, allowing His strength to fill the gaps where ours falls short. Psalm 143 reminds us that surrender doesn't mean walking blindly. It means walking in faith, trusting that God is leading us even when we can't see the next step. David's plea, "Teach me to do your will," reflects this. He doesn't just ask for a destination. He asks for guidance on how to align his actions with God's greater plan. This is a key distinction. Surrender is not passive obedience. It is active alignment with God's will. It's the daily prayer of asking, "Lord, what would you have me do today to walk in accordance with your purpose for my life?" One of the greatest lessons Psalm 143 teaches us about surrender is that it doesn't guarantee immediate relief, but it does guarantee divine presence. When we surrender, we may not receive all the answers right away, and the challenges we face may not disappear overnight. But in surrendering, we position ourselves to receive God's peace, guidance, and reassurance. It's not about escaping trials, but enduring them with the strength that comes from walking hand in hand with the Creator. David's words resonate deeply because they remind us of the freedom that comes through surrender. By saying, "For you are my God," David acknowledges who holds ultimate authority over his life. That acknowledgement is the cornerstone of true surrender. It is a declaration that no problem is greater than God's ability to guide, and no challenge is beyond His power to protect. For anyone feeling lost, confused, or unsure of what's next, surrender might feel like the most unnatural response. But Psalm 143 shows that surrender is not the end, it's the beginning. It's the starting point where fear is replaced by trust, and direction is found in God's perfect plan. Through surrender, we open the door to clarity, peace, and transformation, trusting that God will always lead us on level ground. Practicing daily guidance through prayer and reflection. Prayer and reflection are the heartbeats of spiritual growth. The tools that help us align our lives with God's will and receive His guidance in moments of uncertainty. Psalm 143 not only captures the essence of what it means to seek God's direction, but it also provides a practical framework for how we can integrate prayer and reflection into our daily lives. Spiritual practices like these are not about ritual. For its own sake, they are about cultivating a relationship with God so that His voice becomes clearer, His guidance more evident, and His presence more tangible. David, in Psalm 143, reveals that prayer is most powerful when it is raw and honest. His words aren't rehearsed or carefully composed. They are an outpouring of his soul. "I stretch out my hands to you. My soul thirsts for you like a parched land." This imagery is profound, painting a picture of total dependency on God. Imagine the barren desert in David's metaphor. Nothing can grow, nothing can thrive, unless water comes to restore it. This is how David approaches prayer, not as a transaction, but as a deep, unrelenting longing for connection. In our daily practice, this same approach is key. Prayer isn't about saying the perfect words. It's about humbling ourselves before God, surrendering our needs, and allowing Him to meet us exactly where we are. The first step to practicing daily guidance through prayer is creating intentional moments to seek God. It's tempting to only pray reactively when life feels overwhelming, but Psalm 143 models proactive, constant communication with God. "Let the morning bring me word of your unfailing love," David writes. demonstrating a practice of starting the day by reconnecting with God's presence. Beginning your morning in prayer doesn't just ground you spiritually, it sets the tone for your entire day. It's an act of handing over your plans and seeking God's will before the chaos of life takes over. Reflection is the second half of this powerful practice. David doesn't merely voice his concerns and move on. He also meditates on God's past faithfulness. He says, "I remember the days of long ago. I meditate on all your works and consider what your hands have done." This is a powerful reminder of the importance of reflection in deepening our faith. In the busyness of life, we rarely pause to reflect on God's guidance in the past moments when doors opened unexpectedly, when challenges were overcome, or when peace replaced fear after a prayerful plea. Reflection isn't just an exercise in gratitude. It's a spiritual anchor that reminds us that God has been faithful before and will continue to be faithful again. But for reflection to truly lead to guidance, it must be coupled with silence. In Psalm 143, David stretches outward to God while also drawing inward into reflection. He creates what can only be described as spiritual space, a kind of clearing where he can hear God's voice above the noise of his circumstances. In our modern lives, surrounded by distractions, creating this kind of space feels countercultural, but it is necessary. Silence and stillness aren't empty moments. They are opportunities to let God's guidance rise above the static of our minds. A simple practice of silent reflection after prayer, just 5 to 10 minutes of intentional listening, can completely reshape your spiritual connection. Psalm 143 also encourages us to view prayer and reflection as dynamic and collaborative. When David says, "Teach me to do your will, for you are my God," he acknowledges that prayer is not just about asking for help, it's a dialogue. He doesn't merely ask for relief, he asks for wisdom, guidance, and alignment with God's purpose. This is a critical distinction. Many people approach prayer as though it were a one-way conversation, listing their concerns and waiting passively for a response. But David shows us that prayer is an ongoing collaboration, an active partnership with God that requires both speaking and listening, offering ourselves to His will and being open to His teaching. In a practical sense, Psalm 143 can also be transformed into a daily prayer template. Consider taking David's words and personalizing them for your own life. For example, reframe, "Show me the way I should go, for to you I entrust my life," into a personal affirmation, "Lord, guide my steps today, for my trust is fully in you." This kind of personalized prayer not only deepens your connection with God, but also embeds His promises into your heart and mind, making them easier to revisit throughout your day. Reflection can be paired with journaling to make it even more impactful. At the end of each day, write down brief reflections on where you saw God's hand, whether through a moment of peace, a solution to a problem, or even a quiet reassurance when faced with uncertainty. Journaling creates a tangible record of God's faithfulness so that during future times of struggle, you can look back and be reminded of His guidance. Prayer, reflection, and journaling all point to a larger truth, that our efforts to seek God lead to transformation, not just outwardly in our circumstances, but inwardly in our hearts and minds. When we actively make space for prayer and reflection, the spiritual shifts that occur are not just theoretical, they engage with the neuroscience of our well-being. Prayer and meditation have been shown to calm the mind, reduce stress, and even rewire the brain for greater resilience and emotional balance by stimulating the production of serotonin and dopamine. In other words, seeking God's guidance doesn't just change the trajectory of your life, it changes the way you experience life itself, physically and emotionally. When consistency in this practice becomes part of your life, you'll begin to notice something extraordinary. God's guidance won't just appear in extraordinary moments. It will be interwoven into the fabric of your daily routines. Decisions will come with greater ease. Moments of uncertainty will feel less intimidating, and trust will begin to replace worry as you move forward. Prayer and reflection, as shown in Psalm 143, invite you to live intentionally, to create space for God not just on your darkest days, but every single day. It's not about perfection or performing spirituality. It's about daily walking alongside your Creator, trusting that with every prayer, with every moment of stillness, and with every step forward, God is guiding you to the peace and purpose He has prepared for you. Finding peace in darkness, a new perspective on trials. There is a profound truth hidden within life's darkest moments. They can either consume us or lead us to transformation. Psalm 143 invites us to view these trials in a new light. When David pours out his soul, writing, "The enemy pursues me, he crushes me to the ground. He makes me dwell in the darkness like those long dead," he is acknowledging the depth of his despair. But in that same psalm, David also offers a radical perspective that even the shadows of life hold the potential to strengthen our connection with God, to foster peace, and to teach us resilience. Darkness, in its many forms, is a relatable experience. Whether it takes shape as grief, anxiety, emptiness, or a prolonged season of uncertainty, we all face moments when the world feels heavy and hope seems distant. The power of Psalm 143 lies in how it doesn't deny the existence of these struggles. David doesn't sugarcoat his feelings or pretend that life is perfect. Instead, he leans into the tension of being human, of feeling broken while reaching out for the divine. He shows us that peace isn't found by avoiding pain, but by confronting it hand in hand with God. One of the most striking aspects of this psalm is how David names the darkness without letting it define him. He admits to feeling crushed and overwhelmed, but he refuses to let the struggle have the final word. This is an important distinction. Too often, when we face trials, we feel tempted to let them become our identity. The language we use shifts. I have failed, I am broken, I am lost. These labels attach themselves to our spirit, and over time, they weigh us down. But in Psalm 143, we see David resisting this pull. He describes his pain honestly, yet he never allows it to overshadow his belief that God is present, even in the darkness. This perspective on trials is both powerful and counterintuitive. It reframes darkness not as a void, but as fertile ground for growth. Just as a seed needs to be buried deep in the soil before it can sprout upward, so too can our struggles lead to renewal if we approach them with faith. When David cries out, "Let the morning bring me word of your unfailing love," it's not simply a request for deliverance, it's an act of hope. He trusts that even after the darkest night, God's light will break into the day. This is a spiritual posture that invites transformation. It teaches us that peace is not the absence of trials, but the presence of God within them. This redefined view of trials aligns deeply with Christian theology. Figures like the Apostle Paul echo similar themes, writing about the value of perseverance and how suffering produces character. Even Jesus himself demonstrated the redemptive power of trials in the deepest sense, enduring the cross for the joy set before him, showing that even the greatest pain can give birth to ultimate victory. Psalm 143 reminds us that our moments of struggle are not wasted, but are opportunities for us to draw closer to God and to become more aligned with His purpose for our lives. Take a moment to reflect on your own life. How often have valleys of despair brought about unexpected wisdom or strength? Trials have a way of stripping away everything we once depended on, leaving us face to face with what truly matters. Many people describe this as the end of themselves, a point where they feel completely empty. Yet it's in this emptiness that God's voice often becomes the clearest. Psalm 143 reflects this dynamic beautifully. In his moments of greatest weakness, David declares his total dependence on God. "I lift up my soul to you," he prays. It's a reminder for all of us that our emptiness can create the space needed for God's peace to enter. But how do we actually find peace in the midst of pain? Psalm 143 offers a practical roadmap. First, we must recognize the power of surrender. When David turns to God, he doesn't demand answers or demand that his enemies be immediately eliminated. Instead, he prays, "Teach me to do your will." This demonstrates a crucial principle. Peace is found not through controlling our circumstances, but by submitting to God's guidance. It's a kind of spiritual humility that acknowledges, "I may not see the way forward, but Lord, I trust that you do." Second, peace comes through reflection. David meditates on God's past works, reminding himself that the same God who showed up before will show up again. This practice is more than just comforting. It recalibrates the heart, pulling it away from fear and toward gratitude. Scarred as we may be, looking back to see God's fingerprints on our lives reminds us that we are not alone, even when the way feels uncertain. Finally, Psalm 143 reveals the importance of seeking God's presence. David writes, "Rescue me from my enemies, for I hide myself in you." Hiding in God doesn't mean ignoring our problems or pretending they don't exist. Instead, it means actively choosing to place ourselves under God's protection, to cling to Him as the ultimate refuge when life feels unsteady. This act of hiding isn't passive, but active. In practical terms, it can look like spending more time in prayer, turning to Scripture for encouragement, or surrounding ourselves with a community of believers who remind us of God's promises. Science, too, underscores the power of finding peace during trials. Modern studies on coping with stress have shown how spiritual practices like prayer and meditation can significantly reduce the body's stress response, lowering cortisol levels and activating neural pathways that promote calm and resilience. In a very real sense, placing our trials in God's hands rewires the way we experience them, giving us the ability to approach challenges with clarity instead of panic. Ultimately, Psalm 143 invites you to see trials not as deterrents, but as landmarks along your spiritual journey. While they may cause temporary darkness, they also hold the promise of light. David's story is proof of this. Each verse of Psalm 143 shows his struggle, but it also shows his surrender and transformation. His faith doesn't eliminate the difficulty overnight, but it shifts his focus from his enemies to his God. And in doing so, he finds strength and peace that no earthly circumstance could ever provide. If you're walking through a season of darkness, take heart. Psalm 143 reminds us that our struggles are not the end of the story. The peace we long for isn't found in the absence of trials. It's found in the presence of God. And even when the night feels long, morning is always coming, and with it, the enduring promise of God's unfailing love. A Christian approach to emotional balance. Psalm 143 provides more than spiritual guidance. It offers a deeply practical framework for achieving emotional balance in a chaotic world. David's words reflect the inner turmoil many feel, the pursuit of peace in moments of overwhelming fear and uncertainty. Through his prayer, we see that emotional balance is not about repressing feelings or pretending life is perfect. Instead, It's about anchoring our emotions in God's truth and grace. This is a message that resonates just as much today as it did when David first penned these words in his despair. Emotional balance isn't the absence of emotions like anxiety, fear, or sadness. It's the ability to remain steady in the face of these feelings, to acknowledge their presence while refusing to let them dominate our actions or our faith. Psalm 143 begins with David acknowledging his pain in stark honesty. The enemy pursues me, he crushes me to the ground. He makes me dwell in the darkness. That kind of vulnerability is not just poetic, it's therapeutic. He names his feelings, externalizing them and bringing them into his discussion with God. This is the first step to emotional balance, being real with yourself and with God about where you are emotionally. There's no growth in denial. Healing starts with truth. What's unique about David's approach is that he doesn't treat his emotions as ultimate truth. They hold weight, they affect him, but they don't define him. Today, modern psychology echoes this same principle. Labeling emotions without harsh judgment helps reduce their intensity. David models this beautifully. Rather than letting his despair spiral into hopelessness, he shifts his focus. Reflecting on God's character, I remember the days of long ago. I meditate on all your works. This is the next critical step in balancing emotions, turning your thoughts toward what is true and unchanging, rather than being swept away by the temporary storms of emotion. David doesn't just dwell on God's works as a passive exercise in remembrance. He actively shifts the narrative from one of fear to one of faith. When he says, "Let the morning bring me word of your unfailing love, for I have put my trust in you," he is framing his emotions with hope. The morning becomes a promise, not just another step in time, but a marker of renewed clarity and connection with God. This is a habit worth cultivating in our daily lives, reframing our emotional struggles through the lens of hope in God's love and faithfulness. But Psalm 143 doesn't stop at reframing. David takes action. He petitions God directly, saying, "Teach me to do your will, for you are my God." Action is an essential component of emotional balance. While acknowledging feelings and reframing them is part of the process, dwelling passively in emotions without moving forward can lead to stagnation. David knows this, and he invites God to guide his next steps, taking purposeful action toward obedience and trust. When we feel off balance, simply asking God, "What should I do next?" can serve as a powerful way to reorient ourselves. Obedience often steadies us. One of the most remarkable insights from Psalm 143 is how David uses his relationship with God to create what psychologists term a secure base. In times of emotional distress, we instinctively seek safety, a person, place, or action that brings comfort and assurance. For David, that secure base is God. "Rescue me from my enemies, for I hide myself in you." This sense of hiding in God is not about escaping reality, but about grounding oneself in the ultimate source of stability and safety. In practical terms today, we can emulate this by turning to scripture, prayer, and spiritual practices that remind us of God's constancy in a shifting world. Hiding in God might mean sitting in absolute stillness, closing your eyes, and imagining yourself being held or protected by His presence, or simply taking time to pray when overwhelming emotions bubble up. Interestingly, modern neuroscience validates how spiritual practices like prayer can biologically influence our emotional state. Studies show that regular prayer and meditation calm the body's stress response, reducing levels of cortisol and slowing the heart rate. These physical shifts allow us to think more rationally, make wiser decisions, and experience easier regulation of intense emotions. David didn't have access to this science, but he intuitively understood the calming power of turning to prayer as a refuge. When he stretches out his hands to God, he is doing what we now know changes the body and mind. He's grounding himself in an unshakable truth. In addition to prayer, gratitude is an essential part of David's emotional balance within the psalm. His reflections on God's unfailing love and faithful works teach us that gratitude shifts the neurochemical landscape in our brain, encouraging the production of serotonin and dopamine, which foster feelings of well-being and stability. This is why gratitude journaling is so often recommended as a tool for emotional regulation. By focusing on God's goodness, even in the midst of pain, David models how gratitude has the power to reframe our reality and lift us out of our despair. There's another layer of emotional balance revealed in this psalm: David's focus on God's will rather than his own. Often, the biggest contributor to emotional instability is the gap between reality and expectation. We want life to look a certain way, and when it doesn't, frustration, sadness, or despair creep in. By praying, "Teach me to do your will," David releases his expectations. He surrenders the need for control, asking instead for God to lead him where he wants him to go. In doing so, David exchanges the instability of his own desires for the steady assurance of God's purpose. This is a critical key for emotional balance, letting go of control and trusting God's plan, even when it doesn't match our preferences. Psalm 143 also subtly reminds us of the importance of patience in the process of finding balance. Emotional healing is rarely instantaneous. David's prayer is not marked by a demand for immediate results, but by a willingness to wait, to trust in God's timing. Emotional stability is often a slow unfolding, rooted in the daily practice of seeking God, reflecting on His goodness, and aligning our hearts with His will. To practice emotional balance the way David models in Psalm 143, start small. Begin each day with a prayer, asking God to guide your steps. Take intentional moments of reflection, meditating on how He has carried you before. Journal thoughts of gratitude, even if it's just one small thing each day. And when emotions feel overwhelming, turn the storm over to God. Hide yourself in Him not as a form of escape, but as an act of trust. David's approach to emotional balance, deeply rooted in his relationship with God, teaches us that peace isn't the absence of emotional storms. It's the ability to stay anchored in God's presence through them, in a world that constantly challenges our stability. Psalm 143 remains a timeless guide for fostering a life of resilience, hope, and unshakable trust in God's unfailing love. Psalm 143, the promise of divine protection. Psalm 143 is not only a prayer, but also a declaration of trust in God's unfailing protection. David's words revealed the heart of someone who is battered by life's storms, yet remains anchored in the belief that God is his refuge. His plea, "Rescue me from my enemies, Lord. I hide myself in you," carries an imagery that often escapes us in its depth. To hide in God is more than seeking temporary shelter. It is placing every ounce of your trust in His care, believing that He not only shields you from harm, but transforms your fear into peace. This is the promise of divine protection that Psalm 143 offers, a refuge that doesn't merely shield you but gives you strength to stand firm amidst the chaos. When David speaks of his enemies, the danger is not abstract, it's real. He is pursued, literally hunted, and his words capture the urgency of his situation. Yet Psalm 143 speaks to more than physical threats. addresses emotional and spiritual battles as well. In our modern lives, enemies rarely come in the form of armed pursuers, but they manifest as anxiety, self-doubt, fear of failure, or even the weight of uncertainty that presses us into despair. Just as David sought refuge from external enemies, we too are in desperate need of protection from the unseen forces that threaten to crush our spirits. David's approach to divine protection is a profound reminder that it is not about eliminating difficulties, but being strengthened within them. He doesn't ask God to strike his enemies down immediately. Instead, he asks for safety and for God's presence as reassurance that he is not alone. This is why the image of hiding is so important in Psalm 143. Hiding in God is not an act of avoidance, it's an act of faith. It means stepping into the fortress of God's love and finding peace in the knowledge that he is in control, even when all the evidence around you says otherwise. This idea of divine protection is echoed throughout Scripture, offering us a pattern to follow. Psalm 91 describes God as a refuge where no harm can reach us. Isaiah speaks of God's hand as a shield that protects those who trust in him. Jesus, in his own words, tells his disciples that no one can snatch them out of the Father's hand. Psalm 143 adds another dimension to this truth, revealing that God's protection is not only about safety, it's about transformation. When we hide ourselves in God, fear is replaced by faith, exhaustion replaced by strength, and despair replaced by hope. But how do we access this divine protection in practical terms? What does it mean to hide in God in our modern experience? It starts with recognizing that God's protection often works in ways we cannot immediately see. While we may long for visible, dramatic interventions, God's hand is often invisible, working beneath the surface of our lives to orchestrate outcomes far greater than we could imagine. David understood this deeply, which is why his prayer for protection went hand in hand with his request for guidance. He knew that God's protection was not just a shield, but also a compass, pointing him toward the safest path. To hide in God means to bring our fears, doubts, and struggles to him in prayer, not as a last resort, but as our first step. It's the decision to place our trust in his promises, rather than in our ability to control circumstances. It's a quiet confidence that even when the storms of life seem unrelenting, God's hand is steady, sheltering us and leading us to calmer waters. In moments of despair, it's easy to lose sight of this protection. David himself admits that he feels crushed, overwhelmed, and as though he's dwelling in the darkness. But what makes Psalm 143 remarkable is that even in his lowest moment, his response is still to cry out to God. "Show me the way I should go, for to you I entrust my life," David says. That is the ultimate act of trust, surrendering not only the immediate situation, but also the direction of your entire life. Entrusting your life to God is not just a call for help. It's a declaration that you believe he will carry you through every trial, every battle, and every valley. Divine protection also requires patience. Psalm 143 is not a promise of instant relief, and David doesn't expect God to work on his timeline. By continuing to trust in God even when the way forward remains unclear, David demonstrates a faith that grows stronger in the waiting. How often do we lose sight of God's protection because we expect quick solutions? Psalm 143 teaches us that real protection is not about avoiding challenges, but about being sustained through them by God's faithful presence. Science offers a fascinating dimension to this truth. Studies have shown that cultivating a spiritual practice, like prayer or meditation, helps strengthen emotional resilience in times of stress. When people place their trust in something greater than themselves, their bodies respond by reducing the production of stress hormones like cortisol, creating a more stable emotional and mental state. David's decision to hide in God is not just a spiritual act, it's a model for how faith can holistically protect us, mind, body, and spirit. The promise of divine protection in Psalm 143 is not an abstract concept reserved for people of ancient times. It is alive and accessible today, ready to meet you in whatever battle you face. Whether it's the crushing pressure of career demands, the uncertainty of an illness, or the quiet, unrelenting ache of loneliness, hiding in God offers the same refuge and strength it did for David. It's an invitation to bring every worry, every fear, and every burden to the one who promises, "I will never leave you nor forsake you," ultimately. Psalm 143 reminds us that protection is not just about being saved from something, it's about being saved for something. When we hide in God, He not only shields us, He prepares us to step back into the world stronger, more resilient, and more aligned with His purpose. His protection transforms us, giving us faith where there was fear, clarity where there was confusion, and peace where there was chaos. When David wrote these words, he wasn't free of struggle, and neither are we. But Psalm 143 assures us that the God we serve will never leave us unprotected. His presence is constant, His love unshakable, and His promises unchanging. In His protection, we find not only safety but also the courage to face whatever comes next, knowing that we are never, ever alone. The path to true peace starts now. Psalm 143 is more than a prayer. It is an invitation, a call to embrace the kind of peace that only comes when we stop fighting our battles alone. True peace is not something granted by favorable circumstances or fleeting moments of happiness. It is rooted in something deeper, a relationship with God that anchors us in His presence, even when life's storms rage around us. The final message of Psalm 143 calls us to recognize that the path to this peace starts not tomorrow, not once everything settles down, but right now, within the very chaos we may be experiencing. David's words, "Let the morning bring me word of your unfailing love, for I have put my trust in you," encapsulate this idea beautifully. Morning, as described here, represents the turning of the pager, new beginning, full of divine possibilities. But notice how this promise of renewal doesn't rely on external changes. David doesn't ask for the absence of problems or for his enemies to simply vanish. Instead, he turns to God as his anchor, trusting that God's unfailing love will meet him where he is and carry him forward. This is the profound lesson Psalm 143 offers. True peace is not found in the absence of difficulty, but in the presence of God. The path to peace begins with trust, and trust is built through surrender. When David says, "Teach me to do your will, for you are my God," he is not just making a plea, he's making a declaration. He recognizes that real peace is found not in following his own plans, which are vulnerable to failure and frustration, but in submitting to God's will, which is perfect and eternal. This surrender isn't passive or complacent, it's active, requiring intentional trust in God's ability to lead, protect, and provide. At its core, it's an invitation to rest deeply in the knowledge that even when we don't have the answers, God does. For so many, peace feels out of reach because they confuse it with control. We think that if we could only solve this problem, achieve that goal, or reach a certain milestone, then peace would come. But life doesn't work like that. Control is an illusion. Circumstances change, plans unravel, and what we held tightly can slip from our grasp. David understood this, which is why he didn't pray for control. He prayed for guidance. "Show me the way I should go," he he says. His peace comes not from knowing every step of the journey, but from knowing who walks with him. The reassurance of God's presence allows him to let go of control and replace anxiety with trust. Peace also requires reframing how we view life's challenges. Often, our lack of peace stems from seeing trials only as obstacles, as interruptions to the life we had planned. But David's approach in Psalm 143 flips this perspective. He doesn't deny the reality of his struggles, he names them boldly. Yet he frames every cry, every plea, within the context of God's faithfulness. Each verse reveals his belief that even the darkest moments can be redeemed when placed in God's hands. This reframing doesn't come naturally, it requires deliberate effort to view life not through the lens of fear, but through the lens of faith. David's practice of reflection plays a key role in cultivating this inner peace. In the middle of his despair, he pauses to meditate on all your works. This act of looking back, of remembering God's past faithfulness, recalibrates his heart and mind. It reminds him that God has shown up before and, therefore, will show up again. For us, this practice of reflection can be transformative. Taking time to remember how God has provided, guided, or protected us in past seasons serves as a powerful reminder that his presence is constant. Even in moments of uncertainty, this reflection stabilizes us. Scripture speaks repeatedly about peace as a gift from God, but it also shows us that peace is something we must actively participate in claiming. I hide myself in you, David writes, signaling that finding peace requires a choice. It requires running to God instead of away from him, choosing prayer over panic, and seeking connection with God over striving for quick fixes. Hiding in God isn't a passive retreat, but an intentional step toward rest, renewal, and trust. In a modern world filled with noise, distractions, and endless demands on our attention, finding peace might feel more difficult than ever. But Psalm 143 offers a timeless method for reclaiming it. Begin each day, as David did, by seeking God's guidance through prayer. Pause to meditate on the ways he has moved in your life before. Replace thoughts of worry with affirmations of trust. And when challenges arise, remind yourself that God's protection is not distant or conditional, it is immediate and unshakable. Even when anxiety threatens to cloud your mind, choosing to pray, reflect, and surrender shifts your focus back to the one who controls all things. This psalm also teaches that peace is found not in isolation, but in proximity to God. When David calls out, "Rescue me from my enemies, Lord, I hide myself in you," he is illustrating a profound spiritual truth. The closer we draw to God, the more at peace we become. Refuge in God doesn't mean total escape from life's hardships. It means we no longer face them alone. It means choosing faith over fear, leaning on God's promises to calm the storm within us, even when the storm around us persists. The conclusion of Psalm 143 points us to the ultimate source of peace, God's unfailing love. David's entire prayer is underpinned by his belief in God's eternal faithfulness. This love, unchanging and unconditional, forms the bedrock of the peace we all long for. While the world's definitions of peace shift with circumstances, fragile and fleeting, God's peace is steady. It promises to uphold you when life is good and sustain you when life feels impossible. True peace begins now, not because our circumstances change, but because our mindset does. The invitation of Psalm 143 isn't to wait until you feel ready or until your problems subside. It's to act now. Stretch out your hands to God, lift up your soul in surrender, and ask Him to lead you forward. Only then will you experience the kind of peace that transforms, strengthens, and transcends anything the world can offer. And that path begins with one promise that David clings to and that you can too. God's love is unfailing. When fears arise, when the nights feel long, and when the future feels uncertain, remember that God already sees the morning. That peace, grounded in trust, is as close as the next prayer you utter. Step into it today. The path starts now. Final reflections. Living Psalm 143 in your daily life. Psalm 143 is more than an ancient prayer. It's a lifeline for navigating the complexities of life with faith and clarity. At its heart, it's a call to cultivate a lifestyle rooted in trust, surrender, and dependence on God. These aren't one-time actions, but daily practices, habits that shape the way we face struggles, make decisions, and ultimately find peace. Living out the truths of this psalm requires intentionality, but as we've explored, the rewards are profound. Clarity in the midst of confusion, strength in the face of fear, and peace that surpasses all understanding. David's model of prayer in Psalm 143 begins with honesty, a cornerstone of living this psalm daily. He doesn't shy away from acknowledging how overwhelmed he feels, a vital first step for us as well. Life often tries to convince us that weakness is failure, that admitting fear or uncertainty means we lack faith. But David teaches us the opposite, that confessing our struggles is not only acceptable but necessary. True peace begins when we bring our brokenness to God without reservation. In your own daily life, consider starting your prayers with vulnerability. Let God into the hard places, the fears you can't shake, the doubts you try to suppress, the stress that weighs you down. Psalm 143 shows us that God not only welcomes honesty but transforms it into strength. Another key to living Psalm 143 is making deliberate time to reflect on God's past faithfulness. David meditates on God's works not as an abstract exercise but as a way to reignite his confidence in the present. Take time each day, even a few minutes, to reflect on where you've seen God move in your life. Recognition leads to gratitude, and gratitude shifts your focus from what's missing to what has always been present. God's unwavering hand of guidance and provision. Keep these reflections alive by writing them down in a journal, so they're there to revisit in moments of uncertainty, reminding you of the ways God has been faithful before. One of the most actionable ways to live this psalm is to practice surrender intentionally. David prays, "Teach me the way I should go, for I entrust my life to you." This prayer reveals a profound spiritual principle. Surrender is not passive but active. To surrender isn't to give up, it's to choose trust over control. In your own life, this might mean stepping back from the urge to fix every problem yourself. It might mean pausing, praying, and allowing God to align your heart with His will before you make a decision. Surrender is about releasing the weight of carrying everything on your own shoulders and placing those burdens in the hands of the one who can truly carry them. Another central practice David embodies is seeking God's presence before all else. He writes, "Let your good spirit lead me on level ground." Notice David doesn't ask God for shortcuts or to remove all obstacles. Instead, he asks for enough clarity to take the next step, enough strength to keep moving forward, and enough grace to trust in God's plan. Similarly, living Psalm 143 daily doesn't mean expecting overnight transformations in your circumstances. It means waking up each morning and reconnecting with God, asking Him to guide and steady you throughout the day. Make it a habit to dedicate the start of your day to Him, asking, "What would you have me do today, Lord? Lead me step by step." Hiding in God is another daily practice drawn from Psalm 143, when David says, "I hide myself in you, He isn't escaping reality. He's anchoring himself in the unshakable presence of God. This hiding is less about avoiding problems and more about finding strength to face them. Choose to make God your refuge throughout the day. When life feels overwhelming, take intentional pauses to pray and remember that you are not alone. This simple act of retreating into God's presence, even for a few moments, can calm anxieties and bring renewed perspective. Psalm 143 also teaches us the invaluable link between prayer, patience, and peace. David's trust in God isn't built on immediate answers, but on God's unwavering nature. When you ask for guidance, recognize that God's timing may not align with yours, and that's okay. The peace of Psalm 143 comes not from understanding every detail of the future, but from trusting the one who holds it. If you find yourself waiting, use the time to grow closer to God, asking Him to prepare your heart for what's ahead. Waiting isn't wasted time when it's spent in His presence. Science continues to affirm what David instinctively understood. Connecting with God has tangible effects on our emotional and physical health, from calming the stress response to fostering resilience. Prayer and reflection are proven tools for navigating life's challenges more effectively. Incorporating them into your daily routine is not only spiritually transformative, but practically beneficial. Whether it's setting aside time each morning to pray, taking a midday pause to realign your heart, or ending the day in gratitude, these practices ground you in peace. The greatest gift Psalm 143 offers is the assurance of God's unfailing love. This love is the thread running through every verse, transforming David's cries of despair into declarations of trust. In your daily life, remind yourself of this truth. God's love is constant. It doesn't waver with your circumstances, nor is it diminished by your doubts. When life feels overwhelming, return to the promises of Scripture. Speak them aloud if needed, repeating phrases like, "You are my refuge," and "Your good spirit will lead me." Over time, these words become anchors, steadying your heart in the face of turmoil. Living Psalm 143 daily doesn't mean life will suddenly become free of challenges. Trials will come. David's life is proof of that. But this psalm teaches us that peace isn't about avoiding hardship. It's about navigating it with God's presence. When the winds of life blow fiercely, as they inevitably will, your foundation will hold if it's built on trusting Him. As you go forward, remember, Psalm 143 is not just a prayer to recite in moments of need. It's a roadmap for daily alignment with God's will, a blueprint for cultivating trust, and a lifeline to the peace only He can provide. Begin each day as David did, with honesty, reflection, surrender, and faith. The path to true peace starts with inviting God into every moment, trusting that His love will guide you step by step. The promise within Psalm 143 is simple yet profound. No matter where you are, no matter how heavy the burden, God is your refuge, your strength, and your peace. Live in that promise today and every day.